Welcome. My name is Rachel Peterson, and I am the program lead for the Thinking with Plants and Fungi initiative at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. And on behalf of the initiative, I'd like to welcome you to Rooted in Connection, Rethinking Our Relationship with Trees, Ecosystems, and Community, a conversation between Rebecca McMackin and Basil Camu. A little bit about Basil and Rebecca. Basil pursues his purpose and passions as the co-founder of Leaf and Limb, a tree care company in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Project Pando, a nonprofit that aims to connect people to trees. He is a treecologist, ISA board-certified Master Arborist, Duke graduate, and Wizard of Things. He is the author of the recent book, From Wasteland to Wonder, which outlines ways we can help heal the earth in suburban and urban landscapes. Rebecca McMackin is an ecologically obsessed horticulturalist and garden designer. She writes, lectures, and teaches on ecological landscape management and pollination ecology, as well as designs the rare public garden. Rebecca is currently Arboretum Curator for the historic Woodlawn Cemetery, managing one of the best tree collections in the state. She spent a decade as director of horticulture of Brooklyn Bridge Park, where she managed 85 acres of diverse parkland organically. She was previously a Loeb Fellow and is currently program associate with the Thinking with Plants and Fungi initiative. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
Thank you, Rachel, and hi, Basil. How are
Hey,
you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is so exciting. I feel like it's rare to actually get to talk with people in this context who understand the inherent dignity of trees and other organisms around us, but are also practitioners of a trade.
Yeah,
And, people with jobs who will weed and prune, but they do that work, but they also understand that we're part of this broader community.
right.
And
Yeah,
your practice, from what I understand, is incredibly powerful and influential. You run a tree care company with more than 50 employees who are also treated well, importantly. And I'm curious because I imagine that you grew up like me in a culture that told us that plants and animals were really here for our use. And sometimes even people were here to be used as well. And then at some point, thank goodness, we had an awakening, led kicking and screaming towards an awakening, and
yeah,
realized that that was all, sheer propaganda, and that we were
yeah,
members of these communities with important roles to play. And so I thought maybe you could share what your perspective and practice was like before that realization
yeah,
and what brought it on, and then how it shaped your work and relationships since.
yeah. These are great questions and observations. It is interesting because I did work a full decade plus, actually quite a bit more than that, with trees, never appreciating them. But I remember kind of sort of going through this transformation where I had this growing love of trees and other life. It really sort of began with soil, but point is that I remember just that just sort of smack in the face where I thought, wow, all this time they've been right here. It was the most extreme version of plant bias, sort of in retrospect, and it's been pretty remarkable awakening to this larger world. It's a humbling experience. It's a purpose-filled experience. I feel like I have place. I also feel more sad, I think, because I realize what's been lost, and I can't even appreciate what's been lost. I wish I had a deeper understanding of the role I'm supposed to play and the connection I'm supposed to have, but unfortunately, a lot of that's gone now. Um, but getting sort of to your other part of the question, which is the upbringing, yes, I definitely, when I was raised in I think there are like 44,000 sects of Christianity, and the one I was raised in was pretty extreme. And definitely, yes, Garden of Eden concept, everything is here for your taking. You know, have at it, humans. This is your domain. And it's interesting because I remember. sort of when we announced to our client base that we were getting out of removals. And I had a lot of support for that, but also some people were quite upset about that. And I received this one interesting email from this Christian who told me that this was not my role to play. I did not need to help do this work. Jesus would take care of this work. And it's just interesting. I think that's part of the mindset I grew up with is it's for our taking and we don't have to worry about it because somebody else has got this under control.
Amazing, amazing. I know that for me, one of the big changes in my recent life versus when I was younger is that there was like a profound sense of isolation and really loneliness. And now having this knowledge and recognizing really like, you know, the other organisms around me as kind of like friends. I feel like I'm surrounded by friends. I can walk around
Yeah,
and be like, hey, bluebird, hey, tulip tree. And like, because I recognize them and I know about them, there's like just totally selfishly,
yeah,
my life is just so much more fulfilling as a direct
yeah.
result of that.
Yeah, it is really cool. I agree with you. I'm surprised at how diverse these ecosystems are and spending time with other life and my observations are, they're so amateur at best, but just getting the more you see, the more you see. And there's such deep richness and complexity there. It's really wild. I've become so convinced that we really don't even know the beginning of what we're looking at. Just it's too complex. Um, and I experience that regularly.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's so nice to like, be a small being in like a big complicated system. It can be, I think a lot of gardeners, even a lot of ecologically aware gardeners went from, this sort of idea of 20 years ago of like our work being around maintaining land
Yeah.
and then over to managing land and then stewarding land. And then, I like to use the language of care. I've noticed you use that language as well. And I think that's that relationship of how you go about taking care of these organisms as
Yeah.
and kind of like reset and reimagine yourself from being unrelated to all these organisms. And then kind
Yeah.
of like an early ecological awakening is like, oh, actually, I'm a huge harm. I'm like
Yeah.
actually really bad. I'm a bad guy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then kind of over into shifting of like, you know what? I can be a helpful member of this
Yeah.
community and I can encourage other people to do that. Did you go through a similar transformation?
Yeah.
Is that something
Yeah.
that you like to share out into the world as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty shocking how much damage I did with leaf and limb tree service. We were more of a traditional tree service, but even now, we obviously we're doing a lot of good, but still, we do have a carbon heavy fleet. And I mean, like, Yvon Chouinard will tell you, and he makes a great case. Everything we do is at best neutral, but probably not even that. So I think there's still a pretty heavy footprint. And that's sort of speaking in terms of carbon, but the truth is carbon is the basis of life. So when life is it's also life. It's ecosystems, it's soil, it's water, it's all these things. So yeah, I definitely went through that. Yeah, it's still a challenge today just to think about that, I think. I actually was really fortunate. You mentioned being part of this community. There was this really cool part of my journey where I was both simultaneously reading Braiding Sweetgrass and I was down in it is the eastern side of Ecuador, getting to visit the Achuar community in the Amazon. And it was so cool because what I realized is a lot of, even after let's just call it my awakening, it was still a very intellectual based awakening, practice based awakening. But when I read that book and experienced this way of life that had been in place in South America for who knows how many thousands of years, um, they experienced the living community so differently. I remember going on a walk with one of the Atuar, and he was pointing to trees and talking about how this is where his grandmother and this relative were within that, and it was a very heart-based, emotion-based interaction with the surrounding plant community, and it was just absolutely wild. I couldn't believe it. First of all, the plant knowledge was out of this roof, but plants weren't described in terms of their like he didn't look at it and give it a name. It was more about its relationship in the community and what role it served and sort of the history of how his humans interacted with that plant. And it was just so interesting and how that plant is used. I just found it really fascinating. And I had, that's something that I think is just, I mean, that is a life opportunity we will never get to experience.
I am with you 100%. I feel like it's, the absolute like smallest tragedy of colonialism, this like alienation
Yeah,
of people right now from the ecosystem, of all of the other tragedies. But I'm very hopeful that the practices that we are learning and relearning and sharing, and that they will lead eventually to those sorts of relationships for us and for other people. I do believe in that work. And I see it
absolutely.
more as like, rather than getting to an endpoint, I see it just about as like a way of um a way of living,
Yeah.
and like I think that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, the thing that I am so grateful for Robin Wall Kimmerer for that book, I just feel like the idea of learning from plants instead
Yeah.
of learning about them, and that just changed my whole perspective on everything about gardening. And so maybe you could share like what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned from trees themselves.
Yeah. And I like what you said earlier, and I want to answer that about lessons as well. But I like what you said, whereby we can use this work as a way to connect people. That's exactly sort of my theory of change. I think it happens through a combination of intellectual learning and experiential learning. And one of sort of the built-in models for Leaf Film and Project Pando and anything I do is I want to inspire you to get your hands on. Maybe I ignite some intellectual learning, but then go out and get your hands on, because I think that's where the change happens. And I don't know if it's everybody's the same, but that's how it happened for me. Um, and to that end, I think getting to work firsthand with these plants was very important. I think the lessons that trees teach us is that they give without consideration, and in the process create a rising tide that lifts all ships. These are plants are the only real consumer of sun on the planet, and they convert that into something that we can all use. And that's what builds these robust ecosystems. I mean, that is sort of where the magic all happens, is through plants. So if anything, I think trees teach me generosity. And that's what I'm learning today. There's other lessons at other times. And, it's kind of like, what's your favorite tree? Well, it just depends on when you ask me. Well, it's similar with trees. There's so many things to appreciate, but right now I think it's generosity.
This is so wonderful. I think that's such a a gift, right? To share with other people, especially because so many people are terrified
Right.
of trees. Like they're absolutely terrified. My husband is an arborist who specializes in veteran tree care and older tree care. And he, like you, is often, called when people are scared of their trees and they
Yeah.
would just want them removed. And I'm curious what you think goes into that. Like, why are people so terrified of trees? Is it like really about the tree falling on a house, or is there some other element of like, is it wildness? Is it oldness? Is it death itself? Like, what is that fear of trees really about?
Well, for getting super deep, there's a really great book called The Uncontrollability of the World by Hartmut Rosa, and it's a philosophical piece, but he puts forth this idea that it's this need for control, and uncontrollability creates a certain sort of fear within us. And that's where, but it's also simpler than that. It's like, Bill down the street said it, and now everybody, because these are the things that we say, like, oh, those old trees, they're the most dangerous. Well, no, they're the ones that have been around through all the storms. They're actually probably your safest. It's just like these urban legends that go round and round and round. And then I'd put another facet of this on, unfortunately, I have to point fingers at my colleagues in this industry, because there's a lot of fear mongering for the quick buck. And I participated in that, so I know what it's like. Um, there's like these corporate interests at play. So yeah, that's why push products, push services, push these sort of things. So I guess it's a little bit of each and probably a lot more.
I find it so fascinating, like this idea of oldness and of time and I was recently in England and I was traveling around looking at trees and I saw this ancient linden at Kew at the Botanical Garden there, and it was hundreds of years old and was retrenching. And the water sprouts, the suckers that a lot of people prune off the base of trees, those had been allowed a century ago to grow. And they were, at least a foot, 2 feet thick. They were trees in and of themselves. And the original tree had shrunken. And it was like something out of a fairy tale. I was gobsmacked by looking at this ancient tree. And I thought, I've never seen anything like this. I have absolutely I'm in horticulture, I'm like, and this is just not something that exists. And I think that a lot of what we're asking people to do to value and care for old trees is so hard when they've not only do they not know what one looks like, but they can't even imagine it, right? They
Yeah.
can't even imagine what that looks like. And our practice now is that when trees get to be even half of their age, of their eventual age, we not just chop them down, we disappear them. We just
Yeah.
disappear them out of the landscape. And
Right.
so, how do we teach people to care for something, to value something, to even take a risk on
Yeah.
something that they can't even imagine?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question. It kind of comes down to twofold for me. I think is this practical aspect which is not exciting at all, and that is just convince them with saving time and money because everybody kind of gets that.
Yeah.
So the approach I would use if I can't, my preferred approach is to inspire them and teach them about why their tree is amazing. And there's so much that can be done there, but only a certain small percentage of the population responds to that. So then sort of the other method which attracts more people is how can you save them time or money? Well, save the tree. I do think though that long run, we're going to have to get off this time and money paradigm because this is not serving any humans well right now. I think there's a different path forward, which is one where we really have to add value to other life on this planet, and we have to add value to other things and create a model that does not, people. It can't just account for profit. We have to account for people and planet as well. These are really important parts of our system. To not place value on them is crazy. And I think if we do place value on, well, let me not even say that, but to get there, I'm convinced, and I'm super biased, but I'm convinced the path forward is developing more intimate relationships with other non-human life. And that's sort of
Agreed.
why I do what I do.
I agree. There's always this painful section in lectures that I give where I have to talk about how biodiversity serves individual benefit, right?
Right.
And that pollinators are responsible for 1/3 of the food that you eat. And it feels disingenuous because that's what we're fighting against, right? Is that ideology of selfishness and
Yeah.
isolation and that organisms need to have a use in order to literally survive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's sort of it's like a Trojan horse, right? You're gonna
Yeah.
sneak in the real and you have to, right? Because these people don't have a framework for understanding the value of other organisms yet. You got to get
Yeah.
it in somehow. And I feel like in broader ecological horticulture, there was this movement to bring in native plants, right? And it literally took Americans seeing Europeans using native plants in their gardens to get us to value what we have as beautiful and worthy of, and then from then this aesthetic trend, then
Yeah.
you can kind of grow that ecological functionality. And even I think right now with trees and with deadwood, there's this funny moment happening right now where those of us in arboriculture and ecological horticulture are really bringing in and spreading this value of deadwood, this ecological necessity of deadwood in the landscape. And then you have designers and fancy institutions taking that and running with it. And now you can't go to a botanical garden without seeing a snag. When I was in England, every like Kew had, I don't know, like a 60-foot snag that was like absolutely dangerous.
Yeah.
It was amazing to see and beautiful. And even Sissinghurst had like a small, beautiful ornamental snag. And so you see this like, it's like there's an ecological need. And then like, how do you get that to the people? How do you get that in people's backyards? And so my strategy is through, fanciness. Like, oh, you don't have a snag?
Yeah.
Like everyone has one now. It's so
Right.
cool.
I
So,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like leave the leaves, kind of the same thing. Um, I hope that these can translate into deeper relationships with other life. I, yeah, you're exactly right. The tactics are there. The other thing to think about is the fashion industry. They remake beauty every decade or faster. So surely we can do it once in 70 years. And that's not being fair, of course. There's been change, but just like overall, like let's just think about the standard suburban lawn, not even in the designer world, just like what I see 80% of my day, unfortunately, is just HOAs with hundreds of acres of Bermuda grass and the maple that's been planted improperly. That design, that beauty element, that has got to change, and I think it's starting to happen. And yeah, it definitely originates with the design side and the parks. I think in some ways maybe the mulch volcano, which is that practice of burying the bottom of a tree, probably became popular just because it was in all the shopping centers. So maybe if you just put something in front of people enough, they'll think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like not just peer pressure, but like coolness can play a big role. And now you see the sort of like there's like for lawn shrinkage, right? There's like the kill your lawn movement, it's like punk rock. And then
Yeah,
there's like shrink your lawn, it's like a little bit more acceptable for people. And then there's things like soft landings and whatnot. So you do see it
yeah.
like there's all different ways to get in there. And it's just about a diversity of messages, right? To try
Right.
and like figure out how to speak to each individual, meet them where they're at, and then what are the steps that they can take to make change.
One of the things I think about is the crossover. Where does it go from leaving the leaves to understanding all that life that benefits from it and then appreciating that life and then you know finding the humility to realize you're part of something much bigger than yourself. That to me is the challenging part. And like you, I kind of struggle in how to do the language and the messaging it's because you have to meet people where they are. Some people, all they can hear is an economic model of why the monarch butterfly matters. And then other people are further along in their journey. So it's a challenge, but ultimately, I think if we're going to find deeper meaning in life, it's returning to where we came from. And I think we can bring the best of 2024 with us. Like let's take the antibiotics and stuff, but the the human model, like our entire ancestry, perhaps a million years, but at least a couple 100,000 years, we were participating in this ecosystem. And now in this very recent time, what is just like less than a second on the cosmic calendar, we're living in this bizarre new world that makes absolutely no sense. Any of our ancestors that could come today would just be horrified. I'm sure you know the shifting baseline syndrome concept, this idea that our lifespan is only 80 years. And in terms of, say, like a tree's lifespan, an oak can live over 1,000. And if you're a mountain, you're living for 100,000 years. So this human lifespan is so short in terms of geological time span. So it's a mismatch. So basically, what ends up happening is we're we live this brief lifespan, we have kids, and our kids awaken in this new reality, and they don't realize the little incremental change. By the time we get to the rest of our at the end of our life, we don't realize this little incremental change that's happened, and bit by bit, we're altering reality, and each new generation doesn't know what the last generation knew and doesn't know what the past looked like. So we just have amnesia now.
Yeah, it's so tough. I think, I have like a folder in my computer where I collect images of northeastern forests from before Europeans got here and what they or I mean after Europeans got here with the cameras, but before they were wiped out by Europeans. And so um yeah, trying to keep those past memories of the potential for the future alive is so
Yeah.
so necessary. I really do think I'm pretty hopeful again, like perhaps naively so, but I think that the awareness of these issues, not so much as general like problems with our species, right? Or people or culture or like, society, but like very specific problematic worldviews, economic systems, exploitation, paradigms, et cetera, that are changeable, right? That
Yeah.
are reversible and to a certain degree healable, right? And we have to do the work. We're like not there yet. We're on the path, but I really see the work that we do with plants
Yeah.
and the work of like, sort of like social justice work. Those two things, like for me, they go hand in hand. Because and I see the work of ecological horticulture, real tree care as being a pathway towards a broader awakening where like, yeah, maybe you want to save monarch butterflies because you want them for some selfish, you just want to have monarch butterflies in your life, or you want honeybees so that they will pollinate and keep you well fed, right? Just like pure self-interest biodiversity work. It's really hard to stay in that bubble once you've taken those first steps. Like they very naturally lead to a wide variety of other steps. And I think with your work of, encouraging people to see a tree beyond, it's like the first 40 years of its life, right?
Yeah.
To see that tree as a valuable ecosystem engineer and to have value in life and death. Like that's actually transformative, right? Like that, it breaks people out of this little shell that they've been, really taught to live in. And it's just like a little thread. Like you can just
Yeah.
provide that little thread.
One thing that's certainly to my benefit is people do not expect it from the tree guy. Um, like it just hits them from left field. So most of my industry wouldn't hesitate to give you a quote to remove that tree. So I think one thing we've got going for us here is we just come from such an unexpected angle.
Oh,
So that
just to interrupt you, Basil, just because I don't know that everyone's going to be familiar. You're a tree guy who refuses to chop down trees.
Right. Yeah. We don't cut trees as sort of the headline. The more nuanced version is we're going to evaluate the outcomes. Like, for example, if you have an invasive tree that's causing a lot of destruction in this area and you want to remove it and replace it with native plants, we'll help you with that if we can. But if you want to remove your oak tree for your new Bermuda grass lawn, it's just, we're not going to wag the finger. We don't trigger shame, but we're going to at least try to win you over emotionally. We're going to try to make you fall in love with that tree before we leave. And we're going to try to convince you, well, you can save $5,000 from the deal. So if the love doesn't work, then we've got that going. I wanted to return to one thing you said, though, about change. I do agree with everything you're saying. I would also add that this is a really crucial time in human history where sort of some of the last remnants of indigenous cultures are disappearing. And that's maybe our last bridge to the past. There is a knowledge that was gained that could only have taken place during the evolution of humans across hundreds of thousands of years, and we will never regain that knowledge again. And right now, there are elders in groups, or there are, few remaining groups out there who are intact in South America and Indonesia and some of these places. And there's such an important piece of knowledge there that I would just be, we humans would be wise not to lose that while it's still that little last glimmer is there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I you know, I think the same about like intact systems of all, that are not yet broken.
Yeah,
All those intact systems are worth uh, you know, protecting, celebrating, encouraging, and all of that.
absolutely.
Um, I want to just turn to this idea of, sort of back to snags and trees as valuable as they are dying and even after death.
Yeah,
My husband was a student of Dr. Alex Shigo, who was a plant pathologist for the U.S. Forest Service in like the 1980s, and just brilliant guy. And he would famously say that for many tree questions, like, is this tree old or young? Is it dead or alive? The answer is often yes. That and like that's the case for so many tree questions. And I remember when I was first learning about trees, and I learned about one of my favorite phrases, xylem apoptosis. And so xylem is one of the tubes in a tree that carries water up and down. And apoptosis is essentially programmed cell death. That the cells are like their job is to die essentially, and that's how xylem is formed. That a living tree cell gets into place, um, organizes itself, and then dies. And then that forms the tube that carries water from the roots up to the leaves of the tree. It's like its function is in being dead. And that is this, fundamental dualism that people have
Yeah.
so much trouble with. And it's pretty rare in nature, right? It's like it's trees and coral
Right.
are really the main ones that are both living and dead matter together. And, I think that that's part of maybe what people are so scared of is that idea that like leaving dead things in our landscape or like recognizing a potential role of death
Yeah.
in a community and an ecosystem, et cetera. Like that's just such a difficult thing for people to grapple with. And do you run up against that? Do you find that? Do you like, or is it really like people like trying not to face death when they want their trees
I,
removed?
yeah, you raised such an interesting point. I love how you stated it. I see it in a slightly different term, but just different sides of the same coin. For me, when I look at a dead tree, I think a whole new life has begun because trees live a second life as a dead tree. It's just so cool how it all works too. The fungi pull nutrients from the soil into the wood so that beetles can consume it. It's now worth eating. And then the beetles feed just tons of other life. And then all the birds move in and it's another life. It's really cool. So less dualism there, but sort of more along the lines of life after death, if you will. And I
Absolutely. Oh,
and
sorry, go
I
ahead.
oh sorry. Well, I was just gonna say this last bit. I think in terms of that, I like this idea that even when we die, we're still here. Our carbon is here. I, for one, will not be locking my carbon in a box because I want my carbon to go and live free in the ecosystem because that's how it works. Your carbon is life, and I'll be here for another life. I won't remember this life, but it's not going, the carbon's not going anywhere.
Totally. I feel like that trees are these like generative systems, right? And that they're constantly transforming their environments, right? They're shedding leaves, they're shedding roots, they're shedding bark, like they're constantly terraforming their environments with their growth. And it's like, to me, that's a really comforting thought that
Me too.
that we are also always, supporting our communities with all
Yeah.
the stuff we do in certain ways. And that like we should recognize that in trees and then seek to support that. I think I was listening to an interview between you and Margaret Roach, who is a wonderful, wonderful person. And she was saying she had a really beautiful way of saying that her land is kind of like a tree graveyard where um, she keeps all the trees after they die because she sees them as these organisms that grew there, and that's like their land, kind of. And like, why wouldn't when and the wood is part of a system. It's part of this whole system, and keeping that on the land is so, so critical.
Yeah, totally. And I like what you said about terraforming. That is exactly what trees do. And you alluded to something that I want to flesh out a little bit because I agree with you. Um, we too can be a productive terraforming member of this planet. We don't have to be a destructive terraforming member. Every organism has an impact on its ecosystem, but it's just that most organisms it's productive and beneficial. Right now, we humans are just not. We're sort of a scourge on this
Well,
planet, quite
certain
frankly.
groups, certain groups of humans, right? Not everybody. Some people are doing
Exactly.
fine,
You're
right?
right. I should say
Yeah.
majority.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, let me say actually differently. It might not even be
Okay.
majority, but the net effect on the planet. So, all this to say is, yeah, I think it's really cool the idea that we are a part of this and we're not just a destructive force. We can also be a very productive force and be a participating member. I do think there's a really bright future where we play the role where we can play, which is building life and supporting life, and not just human life. I'm talking about all life now. And that is a really different place to be. That is one where we could actually maybe enter into an equilibrium with these natural systems, and environmental issues are no longer a problem because we're living as a, we're trying to build soil and build populations of trees and grasses and all manner of life. So I don't think humans are the bad guy per se. Okay, I do think we are right now, but I think that there's a happy ending for us if we choose to accept it.
Yeah, yeah, fingers crossed for us
Yes.
in this day and age. We'll see how that goes. You know, at the Arnold Arboretum, there is this wonderful tree that is an old white pine. And when I was in Cambridge, I would visit it all the time, and it's dead, right? And it is, there's no bark on it. All the bark is gone, and you just see this, and it's like, I don't know, 4 feet wide, and it swirls up. It's so beautiful, and it's just this like um it's like a life force, right? It's like this wild presence that is supporting species all around it. And in researching it a bit, it turns out there's a term for this, a kilo tree, which is like a Finnish term for essentially a tree that stands for a really long time after death. It's like a snag, but it's a whole ecosystem. And there's all species of beetles and fungi, et cetera, that like live just on these standing dead trees, right? And so I just feel like I wonder if the acceptance of old trees and dead trees, if that can help people shift their own relationships with not only death and dying, but also that we aren't just individual organisms, but more connected to the world around us.
I think so. I think absolutely. Yeah, I like that concept because you get to see your ecosystem in action. And by seeing the dead tree with all that life, you realize that there's this life after life for that tree. I also like how you described the tree with the swirled bark. It made me think of a comment or a question you asked earlier about sort of winning people over. I think one of the great ways to do that is to point out something unique on their tree. Oh, this is so cool. I've never, you don't see this very much, whatever that might be, swirled bark or something. And if people have this unique feature on their tree, suddenly they're bought in. Or another thing we like to do for particularly old or interesting trees is you give them a name. And now there's sort of a connection there. And I think that's another really good way that we can win people over to these trees. You did a great job describing that tree. It sounds like a very unique and amazing tree.
It is, and that's such a good strategy of naming things and like and sort of like encouraging slash tricking people to like protect them, right? To be like, you have something that's really valuable here. Like you should protect this. And my husband, who was at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, he said that like the old trees that were on crutches and gnarled and those were the trees that drew people, right?
Yeah,
Like there, it's not as though people don't like that stuff.
right.
They love it. They are naturally drawn to those kinds of things. Even a snag, right?
Yeah,
People are naturally, what is this? I'm curious about this. This is something novel, right?
right.
And so it's interesting that it still is so rare in people's own landscapes when these like sort of exemplary landscapes that of botanical gardens and castles and et cetera, they all have these old trees,
Yeah.
dead trees, all of these things, but still there's like such a distance between that and people's backyards. It's fascinating.
Maybe it's because the backyard is just the thing you see every day. And I think sort of that's part of our role as plant lovers who are trying to cultivate other plant lovers is we need to share our enthusiasm because I'm not being disingenuous when I show them cool things on our tree. I can find 50 things that I think are really fascinating on that tree. And if I can hone in on a few and weave a story around it and give them a little education about it, maybe I can turn that everyday pine in the back into something really interesting. Whereas at the Arboretum, it's out there and it's cool. And these people, you could probably actually take the exact same tree and transport it to somebody's backyard, and it would all of a sudden not be an attractive thing. So maybe it's just the fact that it's at the Arboretum that makes it cool. I don't know. It's an interesting question though.
Yeah, just like aura, right? Like put it
Yeah.
in a museum and then it gets,
Or the recognition heuristic, right? The idea like bars that are just opening hire people to stand outside. So you think that's a popular bar. And it kind of like you were talking about earlier with the campaigns with native plants and some of these other movements. Oh, other people are doing it. So I guess we kind of get back to that whole idea is if we can just get other people to think that everybody else is doing it, then there's another reason to love that tree.
Yeah, I like it. We can start a campaign. Where's your snag? You
Right.
or something. I don't know. All right. I think we're close to ending. One last question that we've kind of been dancing around throughout this conversation that I would just love to bring to the front is like that times are so dire right now. They are confusing and scary, and the need for change, like immediate and drastic change, is so palpable just every day, right? It's all around us. And
Yeah.
so I really struggle sometimes with how to garden during, what is sometimes feels like the apocalypse, and how to prioritize this work when it seems like there's so many more urgent issues that should be addressed. And so I'm just curious how you see your work in this broader political context and moment.
Yeah, that's a great set of questions and observations. A couple of thoughts. One, in many ways, this work gives me hope to get through these times. I'm so grateful that I have this work because many people I know don't. They have to sit down and maybe work on a computer all day, or I mean, I get to at least do something that I know is benefiting life. Whether it's life in the soil or life in a tree. So there's meaning in my life. And I think also seeing local properties and patches of woods rebound with different management practices gives me hope that we actually can solve our environmental issues. I know we can. We can do it in a generation or two. Paul Hawken has an amazing book called Drawdown, and he's laid it out. Him and 250 scientists. My work is a tiny subset of that work, but it brings me hope because I get to see it and do it, and I'm in contact every day with meaning. And then I think it also helps inspire many of our clients or nonprofit volunteers because they too go through a similar thing. So in many ways, this work is the antidote to fear and despair. It's something you can actually do right where you live, work, and play. And that is so important. Just one step in the right direction can be all the difference.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Basil. That was wonderful.
Thank you. This was really, really fun chatting with you.